A millionaire comes home early to his penthouse and nearly passes out from what he sees. Alexander Vanderbilt felt his heart stop dead, a brutal blow against his ribs that nearly made him drop his Italian leather briefcase. It wasn't the water that paralyzed him, nor seeing his immaculate greenhouse turned into a muddy swamp of puddles. It was the sound, a sound that hadn't existed in this penthouse for exactly 730 days. Laughter. The millionaire stood petrified in the glass doorway, unable to process the scene. The afternoon sun was pouring in, illuminating the water droplets floating in the air like suspended diamonds. In the center of the chaos, Rosa Pena, the new housekeeper who had barely been at the house for 3 weeks, was on her knees on the floor. She had her navy blue uniform soaked and yellow rubber gloves glistening under the light, but she wasn't cleaning. She was holding the hose upwards, creating artificial rain, while Ethan and Mason, his 2 twin sons, jumped in the puddles with their red t-shirts sticking to their bodies. Alexander opened his mouth to roar, to enforce the strict order that ruled his life, but his voice died in his throat. Ethan, the twin who used to hide under the bed when anyone entered his room, had just playfully pushed his brother. And Mason, the boy whom psychologists had labeled a lost cause because of his selective mutism after the death of his mother, was laughing with his mouth wide open, throwing his head back, surrendered to a pure and wild happiness. Alexander's brain short-circuited. He saw the disaster. Black earth staining the imported white tiles, overturned pots, water running toward the Persian rugs in the adjoining living room. But his ears only caught that childish laughter, a sound worth more than his entire fortune. For a second, the image of his late wife superimposed itself over the housekeepers. It was the same energy, the same vibrant life that had been extinguished by the car accident 2 years ago. Suddenly, Rosa turned her head. Her smile vanished instantly upon seeing the imposing figure of her boss, standing like an ice statue in the entrance. Fear transformed her face. She dropped the hose, which fell to the ground, snaking and spitting water at Alexander's polished shoes. "Kids, get back!" Rosa screamed, not to scold them, but with a fierce protective instinct. She jumped up, slipping a bit in the mud, and ran to stand in front of the twins. She spread her arms covered in yellow gloves, creating a human barrier between the father and the sons. She was trembling. She knew what was coming. In that house, noise wasn't allowed. Disorder wasn't allowed, and wetting the collector's greenhouse was definitely not allowed. Rosa closed her eyes, waiting for the yelling, waiting for the immediate firing that would leave her without money for her sick mother's medicine. But the scream didn't come. Only the rhythmic dripping of water falling from the leaves of the tropical plants was heard, and the heavy breathing of the children peeking curiously from behind Rosa's uniform skirt. Alexander took a step forward, and the sound of his shoe stepping in a puddle rang out like a gunshot in the sudden silence. "What?" Alexander's voice came out hoarse, unrecognizable. "What is the meaning of this?" Subscribe now to find out why this moment unleashed a hidden war in the penthouse and changed everyone's destiny. Hearing their father's stern voice, the twins reacted like someone had just flipped their off switch. The light in their eyes just vanished. Ethan cast his gaze to the floor, and Mason stepped back, shrinking into himself. A deathly silence. That monster that had lived in the house for 2 years settled back into the room, suffocating and heavy. Rosa saw the change in the boys, and something sparked inside her. The fear of getting fired was replaced by a maternal outrage that wasn't in her contract, but came straight from her soul. She lowered her arms, but she didn't move away. She lifted her chin, looking the richest man in the city right in the eye, a boldness that none of the 10 previous nannies had dared to show. "We were watering, Mr. Vanderbilt," she said with a firm voice, even though her hands were still shaking. "The plants were drying out, and your sons were too." Alexander blinked, stunned by the answer. Nobody spoke to him like that. Nobody. "Drying out," he repeated, looking at his soaked children and then at her. "I pay you to clean the dust, Ms. Pena, not to flood my house, and not to ruin my son's discipline." "With all due respect, sir." Rosa took a step forward, ignoring the mud on her knees. "Dust comes off with water, but sadness. Sadness is washed away with a commotion. And your sons have been silent for too long." The air grew tense. Alexander felt a sharp pang of pain in his chest, The woman's words were precise darts. She was right, and that was what infuriated him the most. But before he could answer, before he could decide whether to throw her out on the street or thank her, a shadow appeared behind him. The dry sound of a cane tapping against the wooden floor of the hallway announced the arrival of the true master of order in that house. Mrs. Bernadette, Alexander's mother-in-law, entered the greenhouse. Her gaze swept over the scene with the precision of a scanner. The water, the dirty employee, the disheveled children. Her face twisted into a grimace of absolute disgust. "Alexander!" she exclaimed with poison in her voice. "Are you going to let this servant turn your heirs into farm animals? Look at what she's done. It is an assault on decency." Mrs. Bernadette's shrill voice broke the strange spell that had kept Alexander paralyzed. The millionaire turned his head slightly to see his mother-in-law, impeccable in her gray tailored suit, pointing with an accusing finger, trembling with rage towards Rosa. "Get her out of here immediately," demanded Bernadette, striking the floor with her cane. "Call security. I want them to check her bags before she sets 1 foot off this property." "I'm sure she took advantage of the chaos to steal something." Rosa shrank back into the accusation, feeling the blood rush to her cheeks in humiliation. Ethan and Mason, frightened by their grandmother's screaming, clung to the employee's legs, staining her uniform even more with their little dirt-covered hands. That gesture, so small and desperate, did not go unnoticed by Alexander. His sons, who rejected physical contact even from him, sought refuge with the woman who cleaned the bathrooms. "Bernadette, enough," Alexander said in a low but lethal tone. "Enough?" The older woman's eyes went wide with shock. "Alexander, for the love of God, look at this pigsty. My daughter, God rest her soul, would never have allowed this." I said, "Enough." Alexander's shout was so powerful that the greenhouse windows seemed to vibrate. Bernadette shut her mouth instantly, offended. Alexander ran a hand through his perfect hair, messing it up for the first time all day. His mind was a battlefield. Business logic told him Bernadette was right. The employee had disobeyed, caused property damage, and broken the rules. But his father's heart, that organ he thought had withered away, was still beating to the rhythm of the laughter he'd heard just minutes ago. He turned toward Rosa. She didn't look down, even though her eyes were full of held-back tears. "Take the children to get washed up," Alexander ordered, his cold business voice regaining control. "Right now. Get them into dry clothes." "Yes, sir," Rosa whispered. "And you," he added, pointing at the disaster. "When you're done with them, I want this place spotless. If I find a single drop of water out of place or a mud stain on the floor when I come down for dinner, don't bother coming in tomorrow." Rosa nodded frantically, relieved she hadn't been fired on the spot. "Come on, my little ones, let's go," she urged gently, ushering the twins toward the side exit, far away from their furious grandmother. Ethan and Mason obeyed, but before leaving, Ethan stopped and looked at his father. For a second, Alexander waited for a word, a gesture, anything, but the boy just looked at him with an adult-like intensity, then ran after Rosa. When they were left alone, the silence became oppressive again. Bernadette approached her son-in-law, softening her tone, switching tactics from attack to manipulation. "Alexander, darling," she said, placing a hand on the man's shoulder. "I know you. Miss my daughter, we all miss her, but that woman is dangerous. She's vulgar. She has no education. Did you see how she looked at you? She's a nobody who thinks she's entitled. Those children need discipline, structure, not water games like they're peasants." Alexander shook off his mother-in-law's hand with a sharp movement and walked toward one of the orchids Rosa had been watering. The flower that had been withered that morning was now dripping water, glowing a vibrant green. "The children laughed, Bernadette," he said without looking at her. "And what does that matter if they lose their manners?" she retorted with disdain. "They are heirs to the Vanderbilt empire, not public park kids. If you don't nip this in the bud, that woman will walk all over you. Today it's water, tomorrow she'll want to sit at the table. You have to fire her. There are specialized agencies. I can call that British governess, I recommended. I am not firing her today," Alexander cut in, turning to face her. His face was a mask of exhaustion. "But I will watch her. I'll install new cameras here and in the playroom." "Cameras?" Bernadette smiled slightly, a cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. Excellent idea. You'll see I'm right. That woman is hiding something. People of her class always want something more than just a paycheck. Alexander walked out of the greenhouse, leaving Bernadette alone. As he climbed the marble stairs toward his office, his legs felt like they weighed a ton. He entered his office, a sanctuary of dark wood and leather, and locked the door behind him. He loosened his tie and walked over to the minibar to pour himself a double whiskey. His hands were trembling as he held the glass. "Laughter heals," she had said. He recalled the feeling of seeing Mason with his head thrown back, laughing. He downed the whiskey in one gulp, feeling the burn run down his throat. He sat down in front of his computer and opened the security system. "Let's see who you really are, Rosa Pena," he murmured to himself. He began typing, searching for the woman's background. While the screen loaded, his mind wouldn't stop replaying the image of those yellow gloves protecting his children. It was a gesture that he, in his immense grief and busy life, hadn't shown in years. Downstairs, Bernadette was still in the greenhouse. She stared at the puddle of water where Rosa had stepped. With a grimace of disgust, she pulled out her mobile phone and dialed a number. "Rudolph," she whispered, making sure no one could hear her. "I need you to come over early tomorrow. I have a special job for you." "Oh." "Yes. It involves a pest that I need to exterminate before it takes root in this house." Bernadette hung up and looked toward the ceiling, right where the children's bedrooms were supposed to be. "No one is going to take the place of my daughter," she hissed into the empty air, "and certainly not some starving maid." Upstairs in the children's bathroom, Rosa was drying Ethan's hair with a soft towel. The little boy was staring straight into her eyes. He didn't speak, but he placed his small hand on Rosa's cheek. She felt her heart break with tenderness. "Don't you worry," she whispered to him, forcing a brave smile. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm a tough cookie. And tomorrow we'll invent a silent game, okay?" Mason nodded, and for the first time in months, gave her a quick kiss on the cheek before running out. Rosa stood there, smelling of baby shampoo and humidity, knowing she had just declared war against a powerful enemy and that her only weapon was those two broken children who were starting to heal. Night fell over the Vanderbilt penthouse like a lead cloak, silencing the few noises that remained. In his office, barely illuminated by the bluish light of his computer monitor, Alexander was rereading the medical report he knew by heart for the umpteenth time. The document is signed by the most prestigious child neurologist in New York City, had a diagnosis underlined in red: post-traumatic selective mutism. Alexander closed his eyes and massaged his temples. 2 years, 730 days of a silence that drilled into his soul more than any scream. He remembered the date of the accident with painful clarity. The torrential rain, the police call, the hospital with its smell of antiseptic and death. His wife, Emily, had died instantly. Ethan and Mason, who were riding in the back seats, came out physically unharmed without a scratch, but something inside them had broken irreparably. From that moment on, the voices of his children, those high-pitched singing voices that used to fill the house with life, went out. He had tried everything, absolutely everything that money could buy. He remembered Miss Stern, a British governess with 3 master's degrees in pedagogy, who had tried to force them to speak using a rigid reward system. She lasted 2 weeks. The children ended up locked in the closet, trembling, refusing to come out. Then came the American behavioral therapist, who filled the house with flashcards and colorful stickers. The twins simply ignored her, looking right through her as if she were made of glass. In total, 10 women, 10 highly qualified professionals recommended by high-end agencies had passed through that house. All of them failed. None managed to draw out even a whisper, let alone a smile. The house had become a luxury tomb, a marble mausoleum of silence, where 3 ghosts lived together without touching. And then Rosa arrived. Alexander rose from his leather chair and walked to the large window overlooking Central Park. Down below, in the service area, he saw a light on. Rosa wasn't a pedagogue or a psychologist, nor did she speak 3 languages. Her resume, a crumpled sheet of handwritten paper, simply said, "I know how to clean, cook, and take care of whatever I'm entrusted with." He had hired her out of desperation, because the previous maid had quit. Fed up with Mrs. Bernadette's manic demands, and the house needed urgent maintenance. No one had told Rosa that the children were clinical cases. No one warned her that she shouldn't bother them. She simply walked in, saw two sad children sitting on the stairs, and instead of analyzing them, she offered them a cookie she pulled from her pocket. That afternoon in the greenhouse, it hadn't been technique or therapy. It had been instinct, pure and raw humanity. Alexander sighed, fogging up the glass with his breath. What bewildered him the most wasn't his children's laughter, but how that woman, with her hands rough from bleach and her cheap uniform, had achieved in 20 days what the best doctors couldn't achieve in 2 years. She didn't look at them like broken patients. She looked at them like children. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Rosa was finishing drying the last dinner plates. Her hands ached. Her mother's arthritis required expensive medication, and every extra hour at the Vanderbilt penthouse was vital. She didn't know that the master of the house was watching her from above, nor that his mother-in-law was plotting her destruction. Rosa hummed an old lullaby, a melody her own grandmother used to sing to her back in the old neighborhood. "Are you leaving already, Rosa?" asked Martha, the cook, a stout woman who had been in the house for years and had learned to be invisible to survive Mrs. Bernadette. "Yes, Martha, I've left everything ready. Tomorrow I have to get here early to clean the main hall before the master comes down." Martha walked over and lowered her voice, looking toward the service door with fear. "Be careful, my child. What you did today was a miracle." "Yes. Those children haven't laughed since Mrs. Emily died, but the madam doesn't like miracles if she doesn't authorize them. I saw her talking on the phone with that tone she uses when she's going to fire someone. Don't give her a reason." Rosa felt a cold chill in her stomach. She knew her job hung by a thread. "We just played with water, Martha. They're children. They need to get dirty to know they're alive." "Not here," the cook stated with sadness. "Here, life is forbidden if it stains the rugs. Watch your back, Rosa. That old witch is so venomous she'd poison herself if she bit her tongue." Rosa nodded. She picked up her worn handbag and stepped out into the cool night. As she walked to the subway stop, she prayed in silence. She didn't ask for riches. She only asked that Mr. Alexander, that man with the sad eyes and the voice like thunder, would have a heart big enough to see that his children needed her, even if it was just to clean up their messes. Dawn brought a tense calm to the Vanderbilt residence. Golden light filtered through the silk curtains, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. That very same dust Rosa worked so hard to get rid of every single day. Mrs. Bernadette was already awake. She hadn't slept well. The image of the twins hugging the maid kept replaying in her mind like a horror movie on a loop. To her, it wasn't an act of affection. It was an insurrection, a loss of control. If the children grew fond of the help, soon Alexander would stop listening to her. And Bernadette wasn't willing to lose her position as the shadow matriarch, the only one who, according to her, upheld the dignity of the Vanderbilt name. She dressed in her black silk, and went down the stairs in silence, leaning on her silver-tipped cane. The house was still. Alexander usually came down at 7:30 sharp for breakfast before leaving for Wall Street. Rosa arrived at 7 o'clock. She had half an hour, time enough to sow discord. Bernadette headed to the ironing room, a place she usually avoided, considering it beneath her dignity. There, hanging on a special rack, was the charcoal gray Armani suit Alexander planned to wear for a crucial meeting with Silicon Valley investors that morning. It was impeccable, freshly steamed by Rosa the day before. The old woman approached the suit. Her eyes gleamed with malice. She looked around to make sure there were no witnesses, even though she knew the security cameras didn't cover the inside of the utility room, a blind spot she knew well. She walked over to a flower pot in the hallway. She grabbed a handful of moist black soil and returned to the suit. With surgical precision, she rubbed the dirt onto the cuff of the right sleeve and the lapel. It wasn't an exaggerated smudge, but subtle, as if someone with dirty hands had tried to clean something or handled the garment carelessly. Then, to seal the deal, she went to the kitchen. She took a bit of grease from the range hood and discreetly smeared it on the trouser pocket. "Let's see how you explain this, you substitute mother," she whispered with a twisted smile. She went back to her room, washed her hands meticulously, and waited. At 7:35, Alexander's shout echoed from the master closet. "Rosa!" The maid, who was sweeping the terrace, dropped her broom and ran inside with her heart pounding in her throat. Upon reaching the foyer, she found Alexander standing there with his suit pants on and the jacket in his hand. His face was red with suppressed rage. Beside him, Mrs. Bernadette was shaking her head, feigning deep dismay. "Yes, sir," Rosa said, catching her breath. Alexander threw the jacket onto a chair. "I specifically asked you to prepare this suit. I have the most important meeting of the quarter in 1 hour. Can you explain this to me?" He pointed to the stain of dirt and grease on the lapel and trousers. Rosa walked over, confused. "But, sir, I left it perfect yesterday afternoon. I covered it with this plastic wrap." "Lies," Bernadette cut in, stepping forward with theatrical flair. "I saw you, girl. Yesterday, after that shameful spectacle in the greenhouse, with the garden hose, you went into the ironing room with those filthy yellow gloves. You probably touched the sir's clothes with the same hands you were playing in the mud with." "No." Rosa looked at Alexander with desperation. "Mr. Vanderbilt, I swear on my life. I took off the gloves, I washed my hands 3 times before touching your clothes. I would never do something like that." "So, the clothes got stained all by themselves?" Alexander asked, his voice dropping to that cold, dangerous tone. "Or are you insinuating that someone else in this house sabotaged my suit?" Rosa looked at Bernadette. The old woman held her gaze with icy arrogance, daring her to make an accusation. Rosa knew that if she accused the boss's mother-in-law, it would be the immediate end for her. Nobody would believe the cleaner over the family's respectable grandmother. "No, sir. I don't know how it happened. Maybe I didn't notice," she stammered, lowering her head, accepting blame that wasn't hers to avoid a bigger conflict. "She is irresponsible, Alexander," Bernadette goaded. "She's dirty, she's careless. Yesterday wasn't a game. It was a display of her lack of mental and physical hygiene. And now, look, she has ruined your $1,000 suit. What else has to happen? For her to burn the house down? For her to poison the children by not washing the vegetables?" Alexander checked his watch. He didn't have time for this. The pressure of the meeting, added to the emotional stress from the day before, was wearing out his patience. He looked at Rosa, that woman who yesterday seemed like a savior, and today looked like a walking disaster. "Take it to the dry cleaners right now," Alexander ordered, taking off, his trousers right there to change into others, not caring about the presence of the women. "And Rosa, listen to me closely. My tolerance has a limit. Yesterday it was the water, today it's my clothes. One more thing, just one more, and you leave with no severance and no references. Understood?" "Yes, sir." "Understood." "Shh. She replied with a broken voice. Rosa took the stained suit as if it were a corpse and ran out toward the laundry room. The tears burned her eyes. Bernadette smiled with satisfaction and walked over to Alexander to adjust the tie of his backup suit, a navy blue one he didn't like as much. "You see, son," she said with poisonous sweetness, "you need professional people. That woman is a cancer, but don't worry. I'll take charge of watching her today while you work. I won't let her get near the children." Alexander nodded distractedly, grabbing his briefcase. "Do whatever is necessary, Bernadette. Just keep the house in order." When Alexander left, the slam of the door echoed like a sentence. Bernadette stood alone in the foyer, caressing the head of one of the bronze lions that decorated the staircase. "Oh, I will keep the order, Alexander," she murmured. "And for that, the trash has to go out today." What Bernadette didn't know was that from the floor above, hidden behind the staircase railing, 2 pairs of children's eyes had seen everything. Ethan and Mason had seen their grandmother go into the ironing room with dirt on her hands. They couldn't speak. They couldn't tell their father, but their 5-year-old minds registered the injustice with photographic clarity, and in their silence, they started forming their own alliance. If the adults wouldn't stand up for them, they would have to defend Rosa in their own way. Alexander Vanderbilt's office was on the 40th floor of a glass tower in the financial heart of Manhattan. From up there, the world seemed small, controllable, organized into concrete grids and distant traffic. However, for the first time in his career, Alexander couldn't focus on the stock charts flashing across his 6 monitors. The meeting with the Silicon Valley investors had been a technical success, but his mind was still trapped back at the Penthouse in the ironing room, focused on the grease stain on his suit. His Armani. "She's dangerous," Bernadette had said. "Filthy. Careless." Alexander spun his chair toward the floor-to-ceiling window, loosening the knot of his tie. Doubt is a potent acid. What if his mother-in-law was right? What if he was just letting himself be swayed by the sentimentality of seeing his sons laugh, even just once? Rosa was a stranger, a woman who had appeared out of nowhere, and who in less than a month had turned his house upside down. If she really was careless enough to ruin an expensive suit and soak the greenhouse, what guarantee did he have that she wouldn't leave a stove on or a door open? Anxiety pushed him to do something he rarely ever did: spy on them. He opened a secure tab in his browser and logged into the Penthouse's surveillance system. "Let's see what you do when you think no one's watching, Rosa," he murmured. The images popped up in high definition. Camera 1, kitchen empty, everything spotless. Camera 2, main living room. Mrs. Bernadette was sitting on the sofa, talking on the phone with agitated gestures, probably complaining to some high society friend. Camera 3, the rooftop garden. There they were. Alexander leaned toward the screen, narrowing his eyes. He expected to see chaos. He expected to see Rosa sleeping in a chair while the boys ran into danger, or maybe catching her eating from the fridge without permission. But what he saw took his breath away. Rosa was sitting on the grass, cross-legged. She wasn't wearing her uniform carelessly. She had taken off her apron to keep it clean and had folded it neatly on a bench. Ethan and Mason were sitting in front of her, forming a perfect triangle. They weren't running, they weren't screaming, they were focused. Alexander turned up the volume on the exterior camera's ambient microphone. The sound of the wind and birds filled his office, followed by Rosa's soft voice. "All right, my little ones," she was saying, holding a daisy in one hand and a gray, rough stone in the other. "We're going to play a game about feelings. When something hurts us inside here," she touched her chest, "it's like the stone. It's heavy, it scratches, it's hard. But when we're happy, it's like the flower, soft and gentle." Alexander watched as Mason, the more closed off of the two, reached out his hand. He hesitated for a second. His little fingers were trembling. Rosa didn't press him, didn't push him. She simply waited with infinite patience, smiling with her eyes. Mason touched the stone, then, with a quick movement, pushed it away, rejecting it. Immediately after, he grabbed the daisy with both hands and brought it to his nose, closing his eyes. "That's it," Rosa exclaimed, clapping softly. "Today you're feeling like the flower. Today you're calm." Then the impossible happened. Ethan, who was watching his brother, searched the grass around him, tore up a handful of dry, prickly grass and put it in the center of the circle, staring at Rosa intensely. "Are you upset, Ethan?" she asked, Gould interpreting the gesture instantly. "Do you feel prickly like the dry grass?" The boy nodded vigorously. "It's okay to be upset," said Rosa, taking the dry grass and placing it next to the stone. "Sometimes I'm like a cactus too, but look." She pulled a water bottle from her pocket and sprinkled a little on the dry grass. Even dry things soften with a little bit of water, with a little crying, or talking, or hugging. On the high-resolution screen, Alexander watched as Ethan threw himself into the employee's arms, burying his face in her neck. Mason joined the hug seconds later. Rosa wrapped them both in her arms, rocking gently, kissing their blonde heads under the afternoon sun. On the 40th floor, the most feared man on Wall Street felt his vision blur. A solitary tear, heavy and hot, rolled down his cheek. He covered his mouth with his hand, holding back a sob that rose from the depths of his widower's grief. Those therapists charging $500 an hour had told him his children were incapable of processing complex emotions. And there was that woman with a stone and a flower teaching them to say, "I'm sad," or "I'm happy," without saying a single word. She wasn't a danger. She was the only cure that had actually worked. Alexander slammed the laptop shut, feeling guilty for having doubted her. Guilty for the suit, for the shouting, for the coldness. He checked his watch. The dinner with the investors was tonight at his house. It would be the perfect opportunity, not to fire her, but to observe her closely and perhaps start to thank her. But Alexander didn't know that while he was wiping his tears in the office back at the Penthouse, Mrs. Bernadette had just hung up the phone with a triumphant smile. Her plan for the dinner didn't include gratitude. It included a public humiliation so devastating that Rosa would wish she had never been born. The Vanderbilt penthouse was gleaming. The crystal chandeliers had been polished to the last prism, and the table in the main dining room was set for 12 guests with the fine china, an heirloom from Emily's family. The air smelled of fresh roses and a steak dinner with red wine sauce that Martha had been preparing for hours. Alexander walked down the stairs, adjusting the gold cufflinks on his shirt. He had arrived just in time to welcome the first guests. He was nervous, not about the business, but about the dynamic that was approaching. "Remember, Alexander," Bernadette whispered in his ear, appearing at his side like an elegant shadow in green velvet. "The children must come down, say hello, and then withdraw. No scenes. Mr. Thompson is very traditional. He doesn't tolerate disorder." "I know, Bernadette, don't start," he replied dryly. "And that woman," she continued, ignoring his tone. "I told her to serve the wine and stay invisible. I hope she doesn't make any mistakes." The doorbell rang. The guests started to arrive. Businessmen in dark suits and wives wearing discreet but incredibly expensive jewelry. The room filled with polite laughter, the clinking of glasses, and chatter about the stock market and real estate. Alexander was playing the perfect host, but his eyes were scanning the room, looking for Rosa. He saw her coming out of the kitchen with a tray of appetizers. She was wearing a formal black uniform with a starched white apron, and her hair was pulled back in a tight bun. She looked elegant, but her eyes were cast down, fearful. Bernadette had been hounding her all afternoon with conflicting instructions just to make her nervous. "Mr. Vanderbilt, your home is exquisite," said Mr. Thompson, an older man, short and stern, whose approval was vital for the company merger. "But tell me, where are the heirs? I'd like to meet them before dinner." "Of course," said Alexander, signaling to Bernadette. Bernadette nodded and gave a sharp clap. That was the signal. Ethan and Mason appeared at the top of the staircase. They had been dressed in miniature suits, exact replicas of their fathers, and their hair was plastered with so much gel they looked like wax dolls. They came down the steps, slowly, holding hands, wearing that blank expression they always had around strangers. "Oh, how charming," exclaimed Thompson's wife. The boys reached the bottom of the stairs. Bernadette stepped forward with a fake smile. "Come here, darlings. Say hello to Mr. Thompson. Shake his hand like gentlemen." Ethan and Mason stood frozen. Stage fright paralyzed them. They hated strangers. They hated the itchy suits. They hated the smell of the lady's strong perfume. Mason started breathing heavily, a clear sign of a panic attack coming on. "Come on, don't be shy, insisted Bernadette, discreetly digging her nails into their shoulders to push them forward. At that moment, Rosa passed by with a tray of empty glasses, heading for the kitchen. The sound of her familiar footsteps acted like a magnet. Ethan looked up, saw Rosa, and, forgetting all protocol, forgetting the millionaire investors and his grandmother, he broke free from Bernadette. The boy whimpered, running toward the maid. Mason followed him instantly. Both of them crashed into Rosa's legs, clinging to her white apron like a life raft in a shipwreck. Rosa's tray wobbled, but she managed to balance it with miraculous skill, keeping the glasses from falling. The silence in the room was absolute. The guests were left speechless. Mr. Thompson frowned in disapproval.
"Children!" screeched Bernadette, red with rage. "Let go of her immediately!"
What an embarrassment. She tried to grab Mason by the arm to pull him away, but the boy clung tighter to Rosa, burying his face in the fabric of her uniform. Rosa instinctively took one hand off the tray and stroked the boy's head to calm him, ignoring the fact that she was serving the financial elite. "Excuse me, Mr. Vanderbilt," said Mr. Thompson, his voice icy cold. "I wasn't aware that the help takes priority over the guests in this house. It seems there is a lack of discipline." Alexander felt his blood boil. He saw the scene, his terrified children looking for love, and his mother-in-law trying to yank them away like they were weeds. And Rosa, the only one offering them comfort, looked at Alexander in panic, waiting to be fired for ruining dinner. Alexander walked toward the center of the living room. Bernadette looked at him, expecting him to explode at the maid.
Alexander, do something, she demanded. This woman has bewitched them.
Alexander stopped in front of the group. He looked at Mr. Thompson, then at Bernadette, and finally at his children clinging to Rosa's legs. "You're right, Mr. Thompson," said Alexander, with a firm voice echoing through the room. "There is a lack of discipline, but not in my children." Alexander crouched down to the children's level. He didn't scold them. He put a hand on Ethan's shoulder and another on Rosa's arm, connecting them all. "My children aren't greeting the help," Alexander said, looking up to challenge the entire room. "They are greeting the person who takes care of them, and in this house, affection is respected more than protocol." There was a collective gasp. Bernadette looked like she was about to faint. Rosa stared at her boss with wide eyes, unable to believe what she was hearing. Alexander stood up and looked at Thompson. "If that bothers you, Mr. Thompson, we can cancel dinner, but my children stay where they feel safe." Mr. Thompson held Alexander's gaze for a few eternal seconds. Then, unexpectedly, a faint smile appeared on his stern face. "Loyalty is a rare value these days, Vanderbilt," the investor said, nodding slowly. "It's good to see your children have good instincts." The tension broke, but the internal war had just escalated to nuclear levels. Bernadette stepped back, humiliated in front of her friends and defeated by the servant. As the guests moved into the dining room laughing a bit forcibly, Bernadette stayed behind, looking at Rosa with pure, distilled hatred. Alexander had made a fatal mistake. He had defended the enemy. Now Bernadette knew it wasn't enough to just stain a suit or create a misunderstanding. She had to destroy Rosa completely. She had to accuse her of something unforgivable, something not even Alexander could justify. And as she touched the antique gold watch on her wrist, a macabre and perfect idea formed in her mind. "Enjoy your victory, servant," Bernadette thought, smoothing her dress. "Because this will be the last night you spend under this roof." Dinner had ended. The last guests, Mr. Thompson and his wife, had just crossed the threshold of the front door, seen off with handshakes and promises of future business. Silence returned to the foyer, but this time it wasn't peaceful. It vibrated with the residual electricity of the confrontation during appetizers. Alexander closed the solid oak door and let out a long sigh, loosening his tie knot for the second time that day. He felt exhausted but strangely satisfied. He had defended his children. He had defended what was right. He turned to look for Rosa and thank her, maybe even offer her a raise for the stress she endured. But Mrs. Bernadette's voice sliced through the air like a butcher's knife. "Alexander."
"Get up here immediately!"
The scream came from the upper floor, from the master suite. It wasn't a shout of annoyance. It was a theatrical shriek of panic. Alexander felt his blood run cold. He took the stairs two at a time, fearing something had happened to the children. Upon entering his room, he found his mother-in-law standing next to his nightstand, hands on her head, her face twisted in a fake but convincing anguish. The drawers were open and ransacked.
"What's wrong?"
Alexander asked, panting.
"The watch!"
Bernadette shrieked, pointing at the open, empty mahogany jewelry box. "Your grandfather's pocket watch, the solid gold one with the 1920 inscription. It's gone," Alexander rushed over. That watch wasn't just jewelry. It was the only heirloom he had left from his father. Priceless, irreplaceable. "What do you mean it's gone?" "I saw it this morning before leaving. It was right here." "It's been stolen, Alexander." Bernadette grabbed his arm tightly. "And only one stranger has been lurking around this floor. I saw her today, Alexander. I saw that woman, Rosa, leaving here with a pile of towels, supposedly to wash them, but she was acting suspicious. She was looking all around." "Bernadette, please." Alexander shook his head, refusing to believe it. He had just staked his reputation on that woman. "Rosa isn't a thief. She takes care of the children." "Your naivety is going to cost you dearly," she spat with venom. "The poor are always hungry." "Alexander, she saw the opportunity during dinner when we were all downstairs attending to the guests. She took advantage of you defending her to stab you in the back." At that moment, Rosa appeared in the doorway, her face pale. She had heard the shouting from the hallway while picking up the children's dirty laundry. "Sir?" she asked with a trembling voice. "Is something wrong?" Alexander turned slowly. His gaze, which hours earlier had been full of gratitude, was now clouded with doubt. The seed Bernadette had planted was sprouting fast in the face of the robbery evidence. "Rosa," Alexander said in a dangerously low tone. "Did you enter my room tonight?" "No, sir. I only went into the hallway bathroom and the children's room to get them ready for bed. I would never come in here without permission." "Liar!" Bernadette attacked, walking toward her like a predator. "I saw you!" "You have the audacity written all over your face. Alexander, don't waste time interrogating her. Check her things right now, before she leaves and sells it at some seedy market." "I don't have anything." Rosa took a scared step back, clutching her worn-out bag against her chest. That purely defensive gesture was her undoing. To Alexander, it looked like an attempt to hide the evidence. The millionaire clenched his jaw. The cold logic of business prevailed over doubt. Verify. "Give me your bag, Rosa," Alexander ordered. It wasn't a request. "But sir, those are my private things, my medicines." "Give it to me!" Alexander shouted, losing his patience. Rosa, trembling from head to toe, handed him the old cloth bag. Alexander took it. It was light, carried it to the bed, and dumped it without hesitation onto the white silk duvet. Humble objects fell out. A purse with loose change, a comb, plastic, a bottle of blood pressure pills, a crumpled photo of her mother, and a bundle wrapped in a blue microfiber cleaning cloth, the same kind she used to clean the house. Time seemed to stand still. Alexander reached out and unwrapped the cloth. The gold glint of his grandfather's pocket watch flashed under the lamplight. Rosa let out a stifled gasp and covered her mouth with her hands. "No," she whimpered, her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't put that there. I swear to Almighty God I didn't touch it." Alexander looked at the watch, then at her. He felt a physical pain in his chest, a mix of disappointment and fury. He had let himself be fooled. He'd believed in the kindness of a stranger, and she'd robbed him right to his face. He felt stupid, vulnerable, and Alexander Vanderbilt hated feeling vulnerable. "There you have it," Bernadette triumphed, crossing her arms with a smile of cruel satisfaction. "What did I tell you? A thief. A common criminal who used your children to gain your trust and rob the house blind. Call the police, Alexander. Let her rot in jail." Rosa fell to her knees, weeping uncontrollably. "Sir, please believe me. Someone put it there. I love those children. I would never do anything to hurt them or to lose my job. It's a trap. It's a setup." Alexander looked up from the watch. His eyes were two pools of ice. "Who would want to frame you, Rosa, my mother-in-law? In my own house, you are accusing my family?" Rosa looked at Bernadette, who was watching her with a defiant, icy stare. If she spoke up, if she accused the old woman, Alexander would never believe her. She was cornered. "Get out," Alexander whispered. "Sir, get out." He roared with a violence that made the window panes shake. "Out of my house, right now! And be grateful I'm not calling the police, only because my children are sleeping and I don't want a scene with squad cars. But if I ever see you near my property or my family again, I swear I will destroy you." The expulsion was brutal and swift. There was no time for goodbyes, nor to gather the dignity that had been scattered across the floor of the master bedroom. Alexander, blinded by betrayal, wouldn't even let Rosa wait for the subway. He had the security guard escort her to the outer gate of the luxury complex and leave her there, on the cold pavement, under the yellowish light of a lonely street lamp. Rosa stood there in the street, clutching her purse empty of hope, with her formal uniform still on and her apron wrinkled. She wept in silence, a cry that ached in her very bones. She wasn't crying for the job, or the humiliation, or even the false accusation. She was crying because she knew that up there, in that penthouse, that now seemed like an impenetrable fortress, 2 children were going to wake up the next day, looking for the one person who understood them, and they wouldn't find her. "Forgive me, my children. Forgive me," she whispered to the night wind before starting to walk the 5 blocks separating her from the nearest subway stop. Mrs. Bernadette's victory was short-lived. Alexander locked himself in his study with a bottle of whiskey, trying to drown his rage. Bernadette retired to her room, feeling like the savior of the family fortune. The house went silent, But at 3 in the morning, that silence was shattered. It wasn't a normal cry, it was a crash, the sound of wood splintering, glass exploding, followed by guttural, primitive screams that didn't sound human. Alexander jumped awake on the sofa in his study, his heart racing. He ran toward the hallway. The noise was coming from the twins' room. When he reached the door, he tried to open it, but it was jammed from the inside.
"Ethan! Mason!" he shouted, pounding on the wood. "Open the door!"
From the other side, he could only hear dull thuds and ragged breathing, like caged animals.
"Open up, right now!"
Alexander stepped back and rammed the door with his shoulder. The lock gave way with a sharp crack. The door flew open, and Alexander rushed in, flipping on the light. The scene he saw left him paralyzed, far more than the water in the greenhouse had. The room, which used to be a model of order with its lined-up toys and perfect beds, was devastated. The curtains had been ripped from their rails and were lying on the floor. The lamps were broken, but the worst part was the children. Ethan and Mason weren't in their beds. They were in the center of the room, surrounded by the wreckage of their own smashed toys. Ethan had a picture frame in his hand, a photo of them with Rosa in the garden she had given them, printed on plain paper, and he was pressing it against his chest so hard that the glass was slicing into his palm, bleeding onto his white pajamas. Mason was rhythmically banging his head against the padded wall, making a dull thud, a continuous, heart-wrenching moan.
"Oh my God!"
Alexander screamed, horrified. He ran to Mason and pulled him away from the wall, grabbing him by the shoulders. The boy twisted with supernatural strength, trying to escape, trying to hit himself again. His eyes were wide and wild, lost in absolute panic. He didn't recognize his father. He was just looking for a way out of his pain.
"Mason, look at me. It's Daddy."
"Calm down," Alexander pleaded, struggling to hold him back. Ethan, seeing his father holding his brother, reacted violently. He threw himself at Alexander, biting his arm furiously, trying to free his twin. It wasn't a tantrum, it was self-defense. To them, their father was the monster who had made Rosa disappear. Mrs. Bernadette appeared in the doorway in her silk robe and a night face mask, pale as a ghost.
"What is this racket? They're possessed!"
she screamed, covering her ears. Alexander, with Ethan hanging off his arm, sinking his teeth in, and Mason screaming on the floor, looked up at his mother-in-law. There was blood on his shirt, his own and his son's, and sweat was pouring down his forehead.
"Call the doctor!"
Alexander bellowed with a voice that made Bernadette step back.
"Right now! They're hurting themselves!"
Bernadette ran to find the phone. Alexander managed to wrap his arms around both children, pinning them to the floor with his own weight. He could feel their little hearts beating 1,000 miles an hour against his chest, like birds about to die of a heart attack.
It's okay.
Daddy's here," he whispered, weeping. I'm sorry. But his words were useless. The children didn't want Daddy. They had woken up. They had felt the absence of Rosa's warm energy. With that sixth sense kids have, they just knew she was gone. And their world, which was just starting to come back together, had come crashing down for the second time. Nobody slept a wink at the Vanderbilt penthouse that night. The sedatives the doctor gave the boys barely managed to calm them down by the time the sun came up. They fell asleep on the floor amidst the wreckage of their room, holding hands. Alexander sat there in a chair in the corner, watching over their sleep with his arm bandaged up from where his son had bitten him. He looked at the chaos, at the dried blood on Ethan's pajamas, and for the first time, a real doubt, a deep, eating-away kind of doubt, began to drill into his mind. Why would kids who never reacted to anything react so violently over a simple thief leaving? He looked out toward the hallway where there was a tiny security camera hidden inside the smoke detector. One he'd installed years ago and everyone had forgotten about, a camera pointing straight at his bedroom door. He stood up slowly, like a man walking to the gallows. He needed to see. He needed to know the truth, even if that truth destroyed the little that was left of his family. The Vanderbilt penthouse had turned into a morgue. There was no more screaming, not even those howls of pain from the night before. What was left was a silence that was far worse, a thick, sticky silence that clung to the walls and suffocated anyone who crossed the threshold. 48 hours had passed since Alexander threw Rosa out on the street. 48 hours where Ethan and Mason hadn't made a single sound, not even to cry. Dr. Carter, the same neurologist who'd been treating the boys for 2 years, snapped his leather bag shut with a sharp click that echoed like a gunshot in the twins' room. He adjusted his glasses and looked at Alexander, who was sitting on the edge of Mason's bed, his shirt wrinkled and a 2-day shadow darkening his face. "They're letting themselves fade away, Alexander," the doctor said point blank. His tone wasn't scolding, it was clinically urgent. "This isn't a tantrum, it's severe catatonic depression. They're refusing food and water. Their bodies are here, but their minds have retreated to a place where we can't reach them. If they don't eat on their own by noon tomorrow, I'll have to hospitalize them and put them on feeding tubes." Alexander rubbed his hands over his face, feeling the rough skin. He looked at his sons. They were lying on their backs, eyes wide open and locked on the ceiling, barely blinking. They looked like broken porcelain dolls, empty of that light Rosa had managed to spark in just a matter of weeks. "What do I do, doctor?" Alexander asked, his voice cracking. "I've offered them everything, new toys, ice cream. I even brought in a clown. They won't even look at me." "They don't want things, Alexander," the doctor replied, walking toward the door. "They want the bond they lost. The trauma of kicking that woman out, whoever she is, has reactivated the trauma of their mother's death. To them, it's as if Emily died all over again." When the doctor left, Alexander was left alone with the hum of the air conditioning. He took a spoonful of strawberry jello, Mason's favorite, and held it up to the boy's lips. "Come on, champ," he whispered, begging him. "Just one spoonful, for Daddy." Mason didn't move. He didn't even press his lips together. He just let them hang limp, as if he had no control over them at all. The jello melted, and a red drop slid down his pale chin, staining the pillow. Alexander wiped the smear away with his thumb, feeling a desperation. As so deep, he wanted to scream until he tore his throat apart. In the hallway, Mrs. Bernadette was lurking. Seeing the doctor leave, she marched into the room, bringing with her that intense floral perfume that seemed to suck up the little breathable air left. "That doctor is an alarmist," she said with disdain, looking at the children impatiently. "Feeding tubes, please. What they are hungry for is manipulation. They are emotionally blackmailing you, Alexander, and you are falling for it hook, line, and sinker. Leave him without food for one more day, and you'll see how they'll be screaming for pizza." Alexander slammed the bowl of jello onto the nightstand. He stood up slowly and turned toward his mother-in-law. His eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep. "Get out of here," he said quietly. "Excuse me?" Bernadette blinked, offended. "I am only trying to help you keep your sanity. I've contacted the elite nannies agency. They have a British woman, ex-military, and expert in discipline." "I said get out!" Alexander roared. The outburst was so sudden that Bernadette took 2 steps back in fear. "I don't want British nannies. I don't want discipline. I want my children to live. Don't you see them? Are you blind, or is your heart made of stone? They are dying of sadness. It's that thief's fault," Bernadette shrieked, recovering her defensive posture. "She warped their minds." "You should be grateful I discovered her game before she took anything else." Alexander felt a wave of nausea listening to her. The thief. The woman who had stolen a watch, but who had brought back their laughter. The equation didn't fit in his financier mind. The numbers didn't add up. "Go to your room, Bernadette," Alexander commanded, turning his back on her to look at his children again. "And stay away from them. Your presence upsets them." Bernadette huffed with indignation, smoothed her skirt, and walked out, heels clicking loudly, making sure her displeasure was heard throughout the entire house. When he was alone again, Alexander took out his phone and dialed the number on Rosa's employment file. "The number you have dialed does not exist or has been disconnected," the robotic voice repeated for the 10th time that day. Alexander threw the phone onto the sofa. He felt useless. All his money, his buildings, his stocks, they were good for nothing. He remembered Rosa's look when they kicked her out. There was no hate in her eyes, only fear and worry for the children. Would a calculating thief cry like that? Would a criminal let herself be humiliated without screaming insults? Something prickled at the back of his neck. An intuition. A memory. The night of the robbery, Bernadette said she saw Rosa leaving the master bedroom with towels, but Rosa said she only went into the hallway bathroom. It was his mother-in-law's word against the employees. Until yesterday, the scales tipped toward family. But today, seeing Bernadette's cruelty in the face of the children's agony, the scales were starting to shake. Alexander looked up at the smoke detector on the hallway ceiling, visible from the open bedroom door. The black box, he thought. He had installed that system 5 years ago after a robbery attempt in the neighborhood. It was a standalone closed-circuit setup, completely disconnected from the Wi-Fi to prevent hacking, recording everything to a physical server hidden down in the basement. Bernadette had no idea it existed. She only knew about the visible cameras monitored by the outside security firm. That hidden system was for his eyes only. Alexander kissed Mason's cold forehead, then Ethan's. "I'm going to fix this," he promised them in a whisper. "Daddy is going to find the truth." He slipped out of the room, closing the door softly, and headed for the basement where the server room was. The key to that room hung around his neck, tucked under his shirt. His hands were trembling as he slid it into the lock. He was scared of what he might find, or worse, scared of finding nothing and confirming that Rosa really had betrayed them. The basement was cold and smelled of static electricity. Alexander powered on the main monitor. The blue glow lit up his tired face, highlighting the deep bags under his eyes. His fingers flew across the keyboard, punching in complex passwords until he accessed the local recording archives. Hidden camera 04, main hallway, upper floor. He selected the date, the night of the dinner. Time, 8:20. The video started playing. The hallway was empty, lit only by the wall sconces. At 8:15, Rosa appeared. She was carrying a stack of white towels, just like Bernadette had said, but she didn't go into the master bedroom. She went into the guest bathroom, stayed in there for 3 minutes, came out without the towels, and hurried down the stairs toward the kitchen. Alexander held his breath. Bernadette's first lie. Discovered. Rosa was never anywhere near his door at that time. He fast-forwarded the video. 8:45. The dinner party downstairs must have been in full swing. The hallway was still empty. Suddenly, at 8:52, a figure appeared walking up the stairs. It wasn't Rosa. It was Mrs. Bernadette. In the video, Bernadette stopped on the landing. She looked down toward the foyer, making sure no one was following her. Then she looked up, right where the visible security cameras were, and smiled. Just a little, knowing that angle was a blind spot for the regular system. She didn't know the smoke detector above her head was recording her in 4K. Alexander leaned close to the screen, feeling his heart pounding against his ribs. Bernadette walked toward the door of Alexander's room, opened it stealthily, and went inside. She was in there for exactly 4 minutes. At 8:56, she came out. Alexander froze the image and zoomed in. In Bernadette's right hand, clutched tight against her green velvet dress, was a shiny object. That golden glint was unmistakable, the watch. But she wasn't stealing it to keep, she was holding it openly as she left. Alexander frowned in confusion. If she stole it, why was she taking it out there? He hit play again. Bernadette didn't go down the stairs with the watch. She walked toward the temporary utility room where Rosa left her personal things during her shift. She went into the small room and 10 seconds later came out empty-handed. Alexander's world stopped. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks, crushing him completely. Bernadette had gone upstairs, taken the watch from his nightstand, and gone straight to plant the evidence in Rosa's purse. All while he was downstairs defending his children in front of the guests. "Damn you," Alexander whispered. His voice came out guttural, filled with a hatred he had never felt before. It wasn't just a robbery, it wasn't just a lie. Bernadette knew what Rosa meant to the kids. She knew that woman was the only cure that had worked in 2 years. And yet, just to maintain her control and her class pride, she had decided to tear her out by the roots, condemning her own grandchildren to darkness and silence. She preferred to see them sick rather than see them happy with a servant. Alexander slammed his fist onto the table, so hard his knuckles split open. The physical pain was a relief compared to the volcanic fury burning him up inside. He saved the video clip to a USB drive. He stood up, knocking his chair over in the process. There was no more exhaustion, only a cold, lethal determination. He took the basement stairs two at a time. He crossed the kitchen like a shot, startling Martha, who dropped a saucepan when she saw him. "Sir, what's wrong?" the cook shouted. Alexander didn't answer. He kept walking toward the main living room, where Bernadette was drinking tea calmly while reading a fashion magazine. Seeing her son-in-law enter, Bernadette lowered the magazine. She was about to make a comment on his disheveled look, but the expression on Alexander's face shut her up. She had never seen him like this. He looked like a wild animal about to attack. "Alexander, darling, what?" Alexander walked right up to her and, without a word, pulled out his phone, connected the USB with an adapter, and shoved the screen in her face. He hit play. Bernadette watched the video. She saw her own figure on the screen, sharp, undeniable, holding the watch, entering Rosa's room. The color drained from her face. The teacup shook in her hand and the hot liquid spilled onto her dress, but she didn't even notice. "Alexander, I can explain," she stammered, trying to stand up. Alexander snatched the phone back and put it away. "You have 10 minutes, he said. His voice was so low that Bernadette had to lean in to hear him, but it carried a terrifying, implicit violence. "What?" "10 minutes, Alexander repeated, checking his wristwatch. "To pack a bag and get the hell out of my house." "You can't do this to me!" Bernadette stood up, indignant, trying to regain her authority. "I am your children's grandmother. I am Emily's mother. I did it for the good of the family. That woman was a threat, a nobody who wanted your money. That woman was the only mother your grandchildren have had in 2 years, Alexander screamed, finally breaking his composure. The scream echoed through the whole house, making the windows rattle. "You condemned them. You preferred to watch them suffer rather than lose your stupid status." "I did it for you," she shrieked, crying crocodile tears. "To protect you. You stole from me." Alexander pointed a finger at her, cornering her against the sofa. "You lied to me, and you destroyed my children's mental health. If you weren't Emily's mother, I swear to God that right now you would be in a police cell. But for her memory, I'm giving you the chance to walk out." Bernadette looked around for support, but she only saw Martha and the head of security standing in the entrance, looking at the floor, ashamed but motionless. No one was going to defend her. Her reign of terror was over. "Where am I going to go?" she asked with a trembling voice, realizing the reality. "This is my house." "This was never your house. This is my children's house," Alexander cut in. "You have bank accounts, you have the apartment in the Hamptons. Go there and pray, Bernadette. Pray that my children recover, because if anything happens to them, if they don't eat again, I will come looking for you, and it won't be to talk." Bernadette saw death in Alexander's eyes. She understood she had crossed a line from which there was no return. Without another word, she ran toward the stairs, tripping over her own pride. 10 minutes later, a taxi was waiting at the door. The head of security brought down 2 Louis Vuitton suitcases and put them in the trunk. Bernadette came out wearing dark sunglasses to hide her swollen eyes and got into the car without looking back. Alexander watched the taxi drive away from the living room window. He felt no relief. He felt no peace. The witch was gone, yes, but the damage was done. The house was empty of poison, but also empty of hope. He turned to the head of security, who was waiting for orders. "Rodriguez," Alexander said with a firm voice. "Yes, Mr. Vanderbilt." "Get the car ready and call your best team of private investigators. I want 3 men here in half an hour." "What are we looking for, sir? The watch?" the guard asked, confused. Alexander shook his head, taking the crumpled paper with Rosa's fake address out of his pocket. "No, the watch doesn't matter. We are going to look for the only person who can save my children. We are going to find Rosa Pena, and we won't stop until we find her, even if I have to turn over every stone in this city." Alexander ran upstairs to see the twins. They remained the same, motionless. He knelt between the 2 beds. "Hold on a little longer, my loves," he whispered, holding their cold hands. "Daddy was a fool. Daddy was wrong, but I swear to you that I'm going to bring her back even if I have to beg her on my knees." That afternoon, the machinery of the Vanderbilt empire changed its target. It was no longer about stocks, or mergers, or money. It was about a rescue mission, and Alexander was willing to burn his entire fortune just to find the woman with the yellow gloves. The watch on Alexander's wrist marked 4 in the afternoon, but for him, it was a countdown to the end of his world. 20 hours. That is what Dr. Carter had said before preparing the life support equipment. If they don't react before dawn, we will have to intubate them to force feed them, and the psychological damage could be permanent. New York City burned under an unforgiving sun, indifferent to the panic consuming the millionaire. Alexander wasn't in his air-conditioned office. He was in the back seat of an armored SUV surrounded by screens and maps, while his security team drove at full speed through the labyrinthine streets of Brooklyn, one of the densest and most working-class areas of the city. "Tell me that." "You have her!" Alexander shouted, banging on the partition separating him from the driver. "Sir, the address in the file was a vacant lot," replied Rodriguez, the head of security, his voice tense as he typed furiously on a tablet. "She gave us a fake address to protect her privacy. It's common for people in her bracket. I don't care about excuses, Rodriguez. Find her. I pay millions a year for corporate intelligence. Simet. We just tracked a purchase at a generic pharmacy 30 minutes ago," said one of the private investigators riding shotgun. "She bought medicine and strong painkillers. She paid in cash, but the store's security camera caught her face. It's a 98% match." "Where?" Alexander demanded. "Near the Fulton Street Market. It looks like she's working there." "Let's go, now." The SUV roared and sped off, dodging taxis and delivery bikes. Alexander stared out the tinted window. He had never set foot in this part of the city. The chaos, the noise, the crowds. It was a universe alien to his glass tower. But there, somewhere between tons of produce and the screams of vendors, was the only woman capable of saving his children. The irony burned his throat. He had sought perfection in British nannies and high society in-laws, yet salvation was hiding in a bustling market. They arrived at the Fulton Street Market a spitte 15 minutes later. The place was a monster of concrete and stalls, a seething hive of thousands of people. Food trucks, and the piercing smell of fresh bagels, rotting vegetables, and exhaust. "Sir, it's dangerous for you to get out," Rodriguez warned, discreetly unholstering his weapon. "There's too much movement. We can't guarantee the perimeter. Let us find her." "My children are dying," Alexander bellowed, throwing the SUV door open before it even came to a full stop. "I'll find her." Alexander jumped onto the hot asphalt. His $3,000 Italian suit clashed violently with the surroundings of vendors in T-shirts and stained aprons. He began to run through the narrow aisles of the food section, showing Rosa's photo on his phone to anyone who crossed his path. "Have you seen her? Do you know this woman?" he asked a desperate fruit vendor. "No, boss. Lots of people pass through here." "Move it! You're blocking the cart!" screamed a vendor, pushing a tower of crates. Alexander kept running, tripping over peels on the ground, staining his shoes with black mud and vegetable juice. Sweat soaked his shirt. Desperation was turning into panic. "It's a needle in a haystack," he thought. Then he saw her. About 50 meters away, at a stall selling spices and herbs, was a small figure carrying a heavy sack that looked like it weighed more than she did. She had her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail and was wearing worn-out jeans and a gray T-shirt. She wasn't wearing the blue uniform or the yellow gloves, but the curve of her back, the way she wiped her forehead with her forearm, it was unmistakable. "Rosa!" Alexander shouted, his voice cracking from the effort. The noise of the market was deafening. Hip-hop blasting from speakers, shouts of special offers, horns honking. She didn't hear him. She dropped the sack onto a pallet and wobbled a bit, visibly exhausted. A burly foreman yelled something at her and pointed to another sack. She nodded meekly and bent down to lift it. The image hit Alexander right in the chest. That woman who had held his children with such tenderness was being treated like a pack mule for a few dollars, all because he had fired her without severance pay and with an accusation of theft that stopped her from getting a decent job. Alexander ran, shoving people aside without asking for permission. "Rosa!" This time she turned around. Seeing him, her eyes widened in pure terror. She dropped the sack, which hit the ground, kicking up a cloud of spice dust. Her first instinct was to run. She thought the millionaire was coming to throw her in jail, that he had brought the police to finish ruining her life. "No," she screamed, backing away and crashing into some crates.
I didn't do anything! Leave me alone!
Rosa tried to run toward the back aisle, but her tired legs wouldn't respond. Alexander caught up to her in 3 long strides. "Rosa, wait!" He grabbed her arm. She screamed and covered her face, expecting a blow.
Don't hit me. I swear to you, I didn't steal that watch.
The market came to a halt. The vendors and shoppers turned to watch the scene. A rich man manhandling a humble worker. Several men started approaching with unfriendly looks, gripping tools.
Let her go, rich boy!
One shouted. But Alexander didn't let go. Not to hurt her. He did something that no one, not Rodriguez, who was running up behind him, nor Rosa herself, expected. Alexander Vanderbilt, the owner of half the financial district, the man who never bowed his head, let himself drop to his knees on the dirty market floor. His knees slammed into a mixture of mud and spilled spices. He let go of Rosa's arm and clasped his hands in supplication, looking up at her with eyes full of real tears. "Forgive me," Alexander said, his voice breaking. "Please, forgive me." Rosa stood paralyzed, lowering her hands from her face. She looked at the powerful man kneeling at her feet, ruining his suit, ignoring the hostile crowd. "Mr. Vanderbilt," she whispered, confused. "I was wrong, Rosa. I was stupid, blind. I know the truth. I know it was Bernadette. I saw the video. I know that you are innocent." Rosa felt the air return to her lungs. The truth, at last, but the fear was still there. "Get up, please. You're embarrassing me," she said, looking at the people murmuring nearby. "I won't get up until you listen to me." Alexander looked her in the eyes with feverish intensity. "I'm not here for the watch. I'm here for them, for Ethan and Mason." Upon hearing the children's names, Rosa's expression changed instantly. The fear vanished and was replaced by maternal alert. "What happened to them?" she asked, taking a step toward him and grabbing him by the shoulders of his jacket. "Are they okay? Did they eat?" "They're dying, Rosa," he confessed. And, saying it out loud, Alexander broke down crying without shame in front of everyone. "Since you left, they went into shock. They destroyed their room. They won't eat. They won't drink. They're catatonic. The doctor says if they don't react today, they'll let themselves die of sadness." Rosa brought her hands to her mouth, stifling a sob. "My babies," she whimpered. "They hate me," continued Alexander. "They won't listen to me. They only want you." "I'll offer you whatever you want. Double your salary. Triple. I'll buy a house for your mother. I'll pay for the best doctors. Anything. Just please, come with me. Save them." Rosa looked at the broken man on the ground. She could have taken this chance to get even. She could have spat right in the face of his pride. But Rosa Pena didn't have room for grudges in a heart that big. She crouched down too, meeting him at eye level on the filthy ground, and took Alexander's hands. In hers, which were rough and stained with spices. "I don't want your money, Mr. Vanderbilt," she said firmly, looking him right in the eye. "Get up. Those boys don't have time for you to be sitting here crying. Take me to them, now." Alexander nodded frantically, scrambling to his feet and helping her up. He turned to Rodriguez, who was holding back the onlookers. "Rodriguez, to the car, clear the way." The run back to the truck was a race against time, but this time Alexander didn't feel panic. He felt hope. He had Rosa by his side, and for the first time in days, he felt he wasn't alone in the battle for his children's lives. The ride back to the penthouse was a blur of sirens and speed. Alexander had authorized his security to use illegal emergency lights to cut through traffic. Inside the cabin, Rosa was cleaning her face and hands with wet wipes Rodriguez had handed her. She was nervous, twisting her fingers. "What if they don't recognize me anymore?" she asked in a whisper, staring out the window. "What if it's too late? Abandonment trauma runs deep in kids like that, sir. They'll think I left because I wanted to." "They know," Alexander said, looking at her. "Somehow they know who really loves them. The only thing I'm afraid of is that they won't want to forgive me. But you? They adore you." The car skidded as it hit the driveway of the building. Before the vehicle even came to a full stop, Rosa was already opening the door. The penthouse was silent, but it was a clinical silence, not a peaceful one. There was a private ambulance parked at the main entrance. 2 male nurses were unloading heavy medical equipment, a heart monitor and feeding pumps. Rosa felt a chill run down her spine. She ran toward the elevator, ignoring the doorman who tried to stop her because of her messy appearance. Alexander was right behind her, barking orders. "Let her through! Nobody touches her!" They rushed up to the top floor. The hallway smelled of rubbing alcohol and medicine. The door to the twins' room was open. Inside, the scene was heartbreaking. The curtains were drawn, casting a gloomy shadow over the room. Dr. Carter and a nurse were by the bed preparing the nasogastric probes, clear plastic tubes that looked like threatening snakes. And Ethan and Mason were lying there, pale as paper, with deep purple circles under their eyes. Their chests rose and fell with a slow, shallow rhythm. They looked like they'd aged 10 years in 2 days. "Wait!" Alexander shouted from the doorway, gasping for air. The doctor turned around, annoyed. "Alexander, we can't wait any longer. Mason's electrolyte levels are critical." "We have to proceed with inserting the tubes, or he'll go into kidney failure." "That won't be necessary," Alexander said, stepping aside. Rosa stepped into the room. She walked slowly now, her heart beating in her throat, seeing the boys in that state, so fragile, so faded. She felt her legs giving way, but she took a deep breath, swallowing her own tears. They didn't need her pity. They needed her strength. She walked over to the bed. The nurse tried to block her path, wrinkling her nose at the smell of the market and sweat that Rosa brought with her. "Excuse me, ma'am, this is a sterile area. You can't be in here wearing those clothes." "Move," Alexander ordered with a voice of steel. The nurse obeyed instantly. Rosa reached the edge of the bed. She took off her shoes to avoid making noise and climbed onto the mattress, into the small space between the two motionless bodies of the children. She knelt there, right in the middle of them. "My little chicks," she whispered with that warm, sing-song voice she used to tell them stories. "My brave boys, I'm here now. I'm right here." No one moved. The silence stretched out, tense and painful. The heart monitor kept beeping rhythmically. "Beep, beep, beep!" Rosa didn't give up. She lay down between them and slid one arm under Ethan's head and the other hugging Mason, pulling them against her chest, wrapping them in an embrace that smelled of spices, the street, and infinite love. "I'm sorry it took me so long," she whispered in their ears, kissing their sweaty temples. "There was a lot of traffic, but I'm not leaving anymore. Do you hear me, little ones? I'm never going away again. The Wicked Witch is gone. It's just us here now." Alexander, standing by the door, held his breath. The doctor watched the monitor skeptically. Suddenly, the rhythm of the beep on the monitor changed. It sped up slightly. Mason's hand, which had been resting lifelessly on the sheet, had a spasm. His fingers curled, searching for something. They found the fabric of Rosa's dirty shirt and clung to it with a weak but desperate strength. Then Ethan opened his eyes. They were two wells of infinite sadness. But seeing Rosa's face so close, his pupils dilated. He blinked once, twice, as if he didn't believe it was real. He lifted his hand and touched Rosa's cheek, feeling the warm, real skin. Rosa smiled, weeping openly. "That's right, my love, it's me." "It's Rosa." Ethan let out a hoarse sound, like a rusty door opening after years. His throat worked, fighting against the psychological block, fighting against the self-imposed silence. The boy groaned. "Say it, my life, let it out. Get that stone off your chest." "Go on," she encouraged him, pressing her forehead against his. Ethan took a breath, a deep gasp that filled his collapsed lungs. He looked at Rosa, then looked at his brother, who was also waking up. And finally, with a titanic effort that seemed to shake the foundations of the building, he let out a word, a single word he hadn't spoken since he saw his mother's car burn in the rain. "Mom." The scream was sharp, broken, but clear. Alexander covered his face with his hands and collapsed against the doorframe, sobbing uncontrollably. The doctor dropped the probe to the floor. Upon hearing his brother, Mason shot up as if injected with pure adrenaline. He looked at Rosa and threw himself onto her, burying his face in her neck and exploding into a loud, vital human cry. "Mom! Mom!" Mason started repeating too between sobs, using the word not out of biology but for salvation. To them, Mom wasn't the one who gave birth to them. but the one who rescued them from the cold. Rosa hugged them so hard she was afraid she'd break them, rocking them back and forth frantically, while they cried and screamed, purging 2 years of pent-up pain. I'm here, my sweethearts. Shh, it's over now, it's all over." Alexander watched the scene unfold through a curtain of tears. He saw his children clinging to that humble woman like she was their only anchor in the universe. He felt a sharp pang of jealousy, yes, but it was instantly washed away by a wave of immense gratitude. She had done the impossible. She had brought the dead back to life. Dr. Carter took off his glasses and discreetly wiped his eyes. He walked over to Alexander and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Cancel the ambulance, Vanderbilt, with the," doctor said in a hoarse voice, "and give that woman a raise. She just did what medicine couldn't do." Alexander nodded, unable to speak. He slowly walked into the room. He didn't want to interrupt. He felt like he was intruding on a sacred moment. He knelt beside the bed, at the feet of that tangled knot of embracing bodies. Ethan, calming down a little, looked up and saw his father kneeling there. Alexander expected rejection. He expected hate. But the boy, exhausted by the emotional release, simply reached out a small hand toward him. Alexander took it, kissing his son's fingers. "I'm sorry," Alexander whispered. "I'm so sorry." Rosa looked up and smiled at her boss. It was a tired smile, but radiant. She reached out her free hand and placed it on Alexander's head, welcoming him into the circle. "We're all here now," she said softly. "Now we need to order a pizza, Mr. Vanderbilt. These kids are starving." And through his tears, for the first time in 732 days, Alexander Vanderbilt truly smiled. 1 month later, the Vanderbilt penthouse no longer looked like a photo from a minimalist architecture magazine. If Mrs. Bernadette had walked in at that moment, she would have had a massive heart attack on the spot. There were brightly colored toys scattered all over the Persian rug in the main living room. A pillow fort blocked the entrance to the solemn library, and in the kitchen, the smell of industrial disinfectant had been replaced by the sweet, homey scent of baking chocolate chip cookies. Alexander came down the stairs, adjusting his tie like he did every morning, but something had changed in his ritual. He no longer came down with a furrowed brow, mentally reviewing the day's mergers and acquisitions. He came down listening, and what he heard was music. From the dining room came the sound of voices, not whispers, not crying, but real conversations. "Eat your broccoli, Mason, or else you're gonna stay tiny like a garden gnome," said Ethan's voice, clear and strong, though still with that childish lilt of someone learning to use their tongue again. "You're the gnome," replied Mason, laughing with his mouth full. "All right, my loves. Peace at the table or I'm eating all the cookies myself." Rosa intervened with her playful tone of authority. Alexander stopped in the doorway of the dining room. The scene warmed his heart more than the coffee steaming on the table. Rosa wasn't standing and serving the table like an invisible employee. She was sitting with them in the chair Bernadette used to occupy, buttering a piece of toast for Ethan. She was wearing a simple lavender cotton dress, not a uniform. Alexander had strictly forbidden her from ever wearing that blue maid's uniform again. "In this house, you don't serve anyone. You live here," he had told her the day they returned from the hospital. When they saw him come in, the twins dropped their spoons. "Dad!" they screamed in unison. They didn't run to hide anymore. Now they ran towards him. Alexander crouched down just in time to catch the impact of 2 little bodies smelling of soap and milk. He lifted them up in the air, ignoring the crumbs staining his Hugo Boss suit. "Good morning, champs," he said, kissing their cheeks. "Did you guys behave for Rosa?" "Mason threw juice at the cat," Ethan accused. "It was an accident," his brother defended himself. Alexander let out a loud laugh, a sound his office staff still couldn't quite wrap their heads around. He put the kids down and looked at Rosa. Their eyes met over the twins' blonde heads. There was a moment of electric silence, charged with an intimacy that had grown exponentially over the last few weeks. They didn't sleep together, but they shared something more intimate than a bed. They shared the parenting of 2 little souls that had been lost. "Good morning, Alexander," she said, using his first name at his insistence. though you could still see a slight blush on her cheeks when she did it. "Good morning, Rosa. How did you sleep?" "Good. Tired." "These two have more energy than a nuclear power plant," she joked, pouring him some coffee. "By the way, the school called. They want a meeting to see if they're ready to go back next semester." Alexander took the cup, deliberately brushing against her fingers. "We'll go together," he said. "I want you there. You know them better than anyone." Rosa nodded, looking down with a shy smile. Alexander's phone vibrated in his inside pocket. It was his secretary, the board of directors, the outside world claiming the financial shark back. Alexander looked at the screen, then at the sun streaming through the garden window, lighting up the greenhouse in the back. "I have to go," he said with a sigh, though his feet didn't move. "Go, Dad. Bring money to buy more Legos," Ethan said with brutal pragmatism, making Rosa laugh. Alexander left the house, but the feeling of incompleteness chased him all the way to the office. During the meetings, while annual growth charts were projected and strategic layoffs in foreign subsidiaries were discussed, Alexander's mind was in the greenhouse. He remembered the day everything changed. He remembered the water. He remembered Rosa's fear, and the courage with which she protected his children from his own anger. At 2 p.m. In the middle of a conference with London, Alexander stood up. "Mr. Vanderbilt, we still haven't closed the bond deal," the financial director said, alarmed. "You close it, Ramirez. That's why I pay you a fortune," Alexander replied, grabbing his briefcase. "I have an unavoidable appointment." "With whom, sir? With the senator?" "With my family," Alexander said, and walked out of the boardroom, leaving 12 executives jaw-dropped. He drove himself back home, feeling a childish urgency to get there. When he entered the property, he didn't park in the underground garage. He left the luxury sports car badly, parked in front of this main entrance with the door open, and ran toward the back of the house. He knew where to find them. The greenhouse was exactly how he remembered it from that first fateful day, but without the fear. The afternoon sun turned the place into a hazy, golden box of light. The air was humid and smelled of wet earth and ferns. Rosa was there with her back turned, watering the orchids hanging from the ceiling. Ethan and Mason were on the floor, but this time they weren't jumping in puddles. They were building an irrigation system with plastic tubes and funnels, focused on working as a team. Alexander loosened his tie knot and took off his suit jacket, tossing it onto a rustic wooden bench. He rolled up his pristine white shirt sleeves to his elbows. "You're missing pressure in the main pipe, engineers," Alexander said, announcing his presence. The three of them turned around. "Dad, you're here early," Mason exclaimed. Rosa turned off the hose tap, surprised. "Did something bad happen?" she asked, worried about his unexpected return. "Mrs. Bernadette?" "No." Alexander walked toward her, dodging the children's plastic tubes. "Bernadette is in Europe spending her pension far away from here. Nothing bad has happened. On the contrary, I realized I was missing the best part of the day." Alexander stopped in front of Rosa. They were close, very close. He could see the small drops of sweat on her forehead and a smudge of dirt on her cheek. She had never looked more beautiful to him. She was real. She wasn't a society doll. She wasn't a gold digger. She was the woman who had descended into the hell of sadness to pull his children out by the hand. "Rosa," he said in a deep voice, "I've been thinking about... Alexander. Thinking that this house is very big and that my children need their mother. But I need something, too." Rosa held her breath. Her dark eyes shone with a mix of hope and fear. "What do you need?" "I need to stop being Mr. Vanderbilt when I walk through that door. I need someone to teach me how to live, not just how to make money. You brought life to this house, Rosa, and I never want you to leave. Not as a nanny, not as an employee." Alexander took Rosa's hand. It was damp and cold from the water, but he squeezed it warmly. "I want you to stay as the owner of all this, of the house, of the children, and if you'll give me a chance, of me too." Rosa stood frozen. She looked at the children who had stopped playing and were watching the scene with wide eyes and knowing smiles. Then she looked at Alexander, the man who had once thrown her out on the street and who was now offering her the world. "Alexander," she whispered with tears welling up, "I'm not from your world. I don't know how to use silver cutlery or speak French or dress for those gala events. My world was a tomb until you arrived, he replied passionately. And silverware doesn't give hugs. I don't give a damn about society, Rosa. I want you. Before she could answer, Ethan, impatient with the adult drama, decided to intervene. He grabbed the hose Rosa had dropped, turned the tap to the max, and took aim. He didn't aim at the plants. He aimed at his father. The stream of cold water hit Alexander right in the chest, soaking his silk shirt instantly and splashing his face. "Surprise attack!" screamed Ethan. Rosa let out a stifled cry, covering her mouth with her hands.
Ethan, your dad!
Alexander stood motionless for a second, dripping wet, hair plastered to his forehead and his transparent shirt clinging to his skin. It looked like he was about to explode. He looked like the old Alexander, about to scream. But then Alexander wiped his hand over his face, cleared the water from his eyes, and smiled. A predatory, amused smile. "Oh, so that's how you want to play," he said. Alexander ran toward a bucket full of water they used for the large pots. He lifted it with both hands. "War!" roared the millionaire. Rosa tried to run away laughing, but it was useless. Alexander threw the water, soaking everyone, the kids, Rosa, and the prize-winning orchids. In seconds, the greenhouse turned into a watery battlefield. The richest man in the city was rolling on the wet floor, struggling to wrestle the hose away from his 5-year-old son, while Rosa, soaked and happy, threw handfuls of damp moss at them. The Armani suit didn't matter anymore. The mud-stained Italian marble floor didn't matter anymore. And it no longer mattered that his gold watch was forgotten on the nightstand, because time had stopped in that perfect instant. In the middle of the chaos, Alexander caught Rosa by the waist. Both were drenched, breathing heavily, their hearts racing at 1,000 beats a minute. He brushed a wet lock of hair from her face. "Is that a yes?" he asked, ignoring the stream of water Mason was aiming at his back. Rosa looked at him with her mascara running and the brightest smile ever seen in the Vanderbilt penthouse. "That is a yes, Alexander, but with one condition." "Which one?" he asked, ready to give her the moon. "That you clean up this mess afterwards," she said, laughing. Alexander let out a loud laugh and kissed her. It was a kiss that tasted like fresh water, promises, and redemption. The children screamed and turned up the pressure on the hose, celebrating the final victory of their new family. Outside, the evening was falling over the bustling city full of people running after money and success. But inside those walls, Alexander Vanderbilt had discovered the secret that didn't appear in financial reports, that true wealth wasn't kept in the bank, but was built with water, laughter, and hands willing to heal what seemed broken forever. And so, between puddles and kisses, the penthouse stopped being a house and finally became a home.